The morning sun had just started warming the busy downtown streets when Angela Chen walked towards Sunshine Cafe, her mind preoccupied with the upcoming court case she needed to prepare for. As a defense attorney with 8 years of experience, she had made this coffee stop part of her daily routine for the past 3 years. The familiar bell chimed as she pushed open the glass door, the smell of freshly ground coffee beans welcoming her as always. But something felt different today. The usual warm atmosphere of the cafe seemed tense, like a string pulled too tight. That's when she noticed him, a new security guard she'd never seen before. He stood near the entrance, his badge reading Robert Wilson, and his eyes locked onto her the moment she stepped inside. The cafe was bustling with its usual morning crowd. 2 college students sat in the corner with their laptops, a group of office workers chatted by the window, and the regular barista, Mia, was crafting drinks with practiced ease. Angela joined the line, pulling out her phone to check her emails, but she couldn't shake the uncomfortable feeling of being watched. As she moved forward in the line, she noticed the security guard's reflection in the glass display case. He had moved closer, following her movements. Other customers began to notice too. An elderly woman frowned, looking between Angela and the guard. A young man in a business suit shifted uncomfortably, his coffee cup paused halfway to his mouth. "Good morning, Angela," Mai called out with her usual cheerful smile. "The usual today?" Before Angela could respond, she felt a heavy hand on her shoulder. "Ma'am, I need you to step aside." The guard's voice was sharp, cutting through the cafe's gentle background music. The conversations around them died down. Angela turned, maintaining her professional composure despite her racing heart. "Is there a problem, officer?" "We've had reports of suspicious activity," Wilson said, his voice carrying across the now-silent cafe. "Someone matching your description was seen attempting to shoplift from stores in this area." Angela looked around the cafe, taking in the shocked faces of other customers. She was wearing her usual work attire, a navy blue blazer, pencil skirt, and carrying her leather briefcase with the law firm's logo clearly visible. Several regular customers who recognized her looked on in disbelief. "I'm a regular customer here," Angela stated calmly, though her hands trembled slightly. "I've been coming to this cafe every morning for 3 years. You can ask any of the staff." Mai stepped forward from behind the counter. "It's true, Mr. Wilson. Ms. Chen is one of our most valued customers. She's a lawyer at—" "I don't care what she is," Wilson cut in. "I need to conduct a search." "Remove your jacket, ma'am." The elderly woman who had been watching stood up. "This is outrageous. I've seen this young lady here countless times." Several phones had come out, their cameras recording the unfolding scene. A young woman in scrubs spoke up. "This isn't right. She's done nothing wrong." Angela felt a mix of humiliation and anger rising in her chest, but years of courtroom experience helped her maintain her composure. She knew her rights, and she knew this moment would have consequences beyond just this morning. "Sir," she said, her voice steady and clear, "I am a licensed attorney, and what you're doing is a clear violation of my civil rights. I will not comply with an unlawful search based solely on racial profiling." The cafe manager, having heard the commotion, rushed out from the back office. His face paled as he took in the scene, his regular customer being harassed, other patrons recording, and his new security guard creating a situation that was rapidly spinning out of control. "Mr. Wilson," the manager said firmly, "that's enough. Ms. Chen is a valued customer, and this behavior is completely unacceptable." But Wilson stood his ground, his face reddening. "I have the authority to conduct searches when suspicious activity is reported. Now, ma'am, remove your jacket or I'll have to escort you out." The tension in the cafe reached a breaking point. More customers had their phones out, recording everything. Through the window, passers-by had started to gather, watching the scene unfold. What had started as a routine morning coffee run was about to become something much bigger, a moment that would spark outrage, demand justice, and ultimately lead to meaningful change. Angela stood tall, her legal training kicking in. She knew that what happened next would matter not just for her, but for countless others who faced similar discrimination every day. The simple act of getting coffee had turned into a stand for basic human dignity, and she was ready to fight. The morning sun continued to stream through the cafe windows, illuminating the scene like a spotlight on a stage where an important story was about to unfold. Nobody in the cafe could have guessed that this moment would soon capture national attention and lead to a movement for change in private security practices across the city. This was just the beginning. Would you like me to continue with expanding the other parts of the story? I've kept the language simple and natural while building tension and emotional investment. The narrative focuses on the human elements and realistic reactions while avoiding any content that might violate platform policies. The tension in Sunshine Caffe had reached its peak. Angela Chen's calm refusal to submit to the guards' unlawful search had created a standoff that nobody wanted, but nobody could look away from. The morning coffee crowd had formed an unconscious circle around them, like witnesses to a coming storm. Last warning, Wilson barked, his hand now resting on his belt. Remove your jacket, or I'm calling the police. Angela took a deep breath, her attorney's mind already documenting every detail. Go ahead, she said firmly. Call them. I'd very much like to explain to them how you're violating my civil rights. A young man in the crowd spoke up, his voice shaking slightly with anger. Hey man, we're all recording this. You can't just harass people because you feel like it. Wilson's face twisted with frustration. Everyone needs to back up. This is a security matter. But nobody moved. If anything, the circle of witnesses grew tighter, phones steady in their hands, capturing every moment. The cafe manager, looking increasingly distressed, tried again to defuse the situation. Mr. Wilson, please step into my office. We need to discuss this immediately. But Wilson seemed beyond reasoning. In a move that would later be replayed thousands of times on social media, he reached for Angela's jacket. If you won't comply, I'll have tow. Take your hands off me. Angela's voice cut through the cafe like a blade. I am not consenting to this search. You have no probable cause, no authority, and about 20 witnesses filming your every move. An older gentleman who had been quietly watching stepped forward. I'm a retired police officer, he announced, his voice carrying the weight of experience. Son, you're way out of line here. You have no legal authority to conduct searches, and you're heading straight for a lawsuit. The guard's hand froze mid-reach. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his face. The phone's recording him, the crowd's hostile murmurs, and now this new voice of authority. It was all starting to crack his facade of control. May, the barista, had tears in her eyes as she watched from behind the counter. She'd served Angela hundreds of times, sharing small talk about cases and weather. Now she felt helpless watching her customer endure this humiliation. That's when Angela did something unexpected. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number, putting it on speaker. Hello, this is Angela Chen. I'm currently at Sunshine Caffe on 5th Street, where I'm being unlawfully detained and harassed by a security guard. Yes, I'd like to file a formal complaint, and I need officers dispatched immediately. The professional voice on the other end responded clearly enough for everyone to hear. We'll send officers right away, Ms. Chen. Please stay on the line. Wilson's face paled slightly. This wasn't going according to his plan. The crowd had grown larger, with people pressed against the cafe windows from outside, drawn by the commotion. Some held signs they'd hastily made on their phones. Stop racial profiling, and we stand with her. A young woman who had been quietly filming spoke up. I just posted this live on social media. It's already getting shared. People are on their way to support you. The cafe manager, seeing the situation spiraling beyond control, made an executive decision. Mr. Wilson, you're suspended effectively immediately. Please leave the premises. But Wilson stood his ground, his pride seemingly overriding his judgment. I'm doing my job. There was a report. A report of what exactly? Angela interrupted, her voice steady but intense. Because I'd very much like to see this report. I'd like to know exactly who reported someone matching my description, and what that description was. Was it just black woman in professional attire? Or did you even have a report at all? The silence that followed was deafening. Outside, police sirens could be heard approaching. Several customers had tears in their eyes, moved by the dignity with which Angela handled the situation. A small group of regular customers formed a protective semicircle around her, their message clear: she wasn't alone. The first police officer entered the cafe, taking in the scene with practiced efficiency. "What seems to be the problem here?" "Officer," Angela began, her lawyer's training evident in every word. "I'd like to file a formal complaint against this security guard for racial profiling, harassment, and attempted assault. I have multiple witnesses and video evidence." The morning sun now streamed fully through the cafe windows, illuminating the scene in harsh clarity. What had started as a simple coffee run had transformed into a moment of reckoning, not just for one security guard, but for a system that too often turned a blind eye to such abuses of power. As the police began taking statements and reviewing footage, the crowd outside had grown into an impromptu protest. Word had spread quickly through social media, and people were responding. They carried hastily made signs and shared their own stories of similar experiences. This wasn't just about one incident anymore. It had become a catalyst for something much bigger. A moment when one woman's stand against injustice would spark a movement for change that would ripple far beyond the walls of Sunshine Café. And as Angela stood there, giving her statement to the police, she knew this was just the beginning of a much longer fight for justice. Would you like me to continue with part 3? I've maintained the emotional engagement while keeping the language accessible and avoiding any content that might violate platform policies. The focus remains on human dignity and peaceful resistance to discrimination. By afternoon, the video of the morning's events at Sunshine Café had spread like wildfire across social media. The footage, captured from multiple angles by concerned customers, painted a clear picture of what happened. People watched in disbelief as they saw a professional woman being harassed simply for buying coffee. Outside the cafe, a crowd had gathered. What started as a handful of protesters had grown into hundreds of people. They weren't just angry, they were organized. Local community leaders had arrived, bringing megaphones and sharing their own experiences of discrimination. The sidewalk had become an impromptu stage for people to speak their truth. "I've been coming to this cafe for 5 years," one elderly woman spoke into the megaphone, her voice trembling with emotion. "I've seen that young lady here countless times. She always holds the door for others, tips generously, and knows every staff member by name. What happened today isn't just wrong, it's a wake-up call for all of us." News vans lined the street, their reporters doing live broadcasts. The local channel's top reporter stood in front of the growing crowd, microphone in hand. "We live outside Sunshine Café, where this morning's incident has sparked what locals are calling a movement for change." The video, which has now been viewed over 1 million times, shows. Inside her law office across town, Angela sat with her colleagues, watching the coverage unfold on multiple screens. Her phone hadn't stopped ringing since she'd left the cafe. Civil rights organizations, news outlets, and other victims of similar discrimination all wanted to speak with her. "Look at this," her colleague said, pointing to his computer screen. People are sharing their own stories with the hashtag #CoffeeWhileBlack. It's trending nationwide. The cafe's corporate office had called an emergency meeting. Their PR team was in crisis mode as comments flooded their social media accounts. Many loyal customers were posting photos of their cut-up loyalty cards, vowing never to return until real changes were made. Back at the protest, a young student stood up to speak. "My mom told me to always dress nice, speak softly, and never cause trouble," she said, wiping tears from her eyes. "But you know what? Even when we do everything right, some people will still only see the color of our skin. Today, we're saying enough is enough." The crowd erupted in supportive cheers. Someone started singing "We Shall Overcome," and soon hundreds of voices joined in. The melody drifted through the streets, drawing more people to the scene. Local business owners from neighboring shops brought out water bottles and snacks for the protesters. A food truck owner parked nearby announced he would donate all day's proceeds to a legal fund for fighting discrimination. The community was coming together in ways no one had expected. The cafe's regular employees gathered outside too, wearing their uniforms but joining the protesters. Me, the barista who had tried to defend Angela, spoke to reporters. "We love our customers. They're like family. What happened today goes against everything we stand for. We're here to say this isn't okay, and it never was." Social media influencers who normally posted about fashion and food were now sharing the video and urging their followers to speak up against discrimination. The story had struck a chord that transcended the usual social media bubbles. A local church group arrived with chairs for elderly protesters. A children's art class brought signs they had painted during their lesson. A nearby printer rushed out hundreds of free posters reading "Coffee has no color" and "Dignity for all." As evening approached, someone brought strings of lights, turning the protest into a peaceful vigil. People shared stories of their own experiences with discrimination, each tale met with supportive hugs and promises of solidarity. Angela received a call from a national civil rights organization. "We've been monitoring similar incidents across the country," the representative said. "Your case could be the catalyst for real change in how private security companies operate. Would you be willing to work with us?" The security company that employed Wilson had gone into damage control mode. They issued a statement announcing his termination and promising a complete review of their hiring and training practices. But people weren't satisfied with just words. They wanted proof of real change. Local politicians began showing up at the protest, some genuinely moved by the community's response, others perhaps sensing a political opportunity. But the crowd's focus remained clear. This wasn't about politics, it was about human dignity. A group of regular customers started an online petition demanding the Caffe chain implement mandatory anti-bias training, hire more diverse staff, and create a community oversight board. Within hours, it had gathered thousands of signatures. As night fell, the protest had evolved into something more: a community gathering, a sharing of stories, a peaceful but powerful demonstration of unity. People from all walks of life stood together, holding candles and making promises to do better, to speak up, to stand together. The day's events had transformed a simple coffee shop into a symbol of both what needed to change and how people could come together to demand that change. It wasn't just about one incident anymore, it had become a movement. And somewhere in the crowd, someone started a new chant that would soon become the rallying cry of their cause: "No more silence, no more fear. Everyone is welcome here." Would you like me to continue with Part 4? I've maintained the focus on community response and peaceful protest while keeping the language accessible and avoiding any content that might violate platform policies. The narrative emphasizes human connection and positive collective action in the face of discrimination. The corporate headquarters of Sunshine Caffe buzzed with nervous energy. In a glass-walled conference room, executives sat around a long table, their faces lit by laptop screens displaying the viral videos of the incident. The company's internal investigation was underway, and what they were discovering made them increasingly uncomfortable. "Look at his employment history," the head of HR said, spreading papers across the table. "Wilson worked at 6 different security companies in the past 3 years. Each time, he left suddenly with no explanation in his file." The chief of operations leaned forward. "And none of these companies flagged this pattern? Nobody thought to ask why?" A young intern from the HR department spoke up, her voice shaking slightly. "I did some deeper digging. There were complaints filed at each location. All of them involved similar instances of harassment, but they were all marked as resolved with no further action." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. One of the board members, an older woman who'd helped build the company from its early days, removed her glasses slowly. "So not only did we hire someone with a history of discrimination, but we're also looking at a system that helped hide it. This goes beyond one guard or one incident." Meanwhile, at Angela's law firm, a team of young attorneys worked late into the night, their desks covered with similar files. They'd received calls from people who recognized Wilson from other locations, each with their own story to tell. "I've got 3 complaints from the shopping mall where he worked last year," one attorney called out, waving a folder. "All involving young black women. All mysteriously resolved without investigation." Angela stood at a whiteboard, connecting the dots between incidents, locations, and dates. A pattern was emerging, one that suggested this wasn't just about individual bias, but about a system that allowed such behavior to continue unchecked. The investigation took an unexpected turn when a former security company employee reached out anonymously. "I had to quit," she told Angela over the phone, her voice barely above a whisper. "I tried reporting him multiple times. Each time, management would say they'd handle it. Instead, they'd transfer him to a different location. They said it was easier than dealing with potential lawsuits." As news of the investigation spread, more people came forward. A former mall employee shared security footage of Wilson harassing customers. A retired security supervisor admitted to receiving complaints, but feeling pressured to handle things quietly. The Caffe's corporate office hired an independent auditing firm to review their hiring practices. The auditor's preliminary findings were troubling. There were gaps in background checks, inconsistencies in training requirements, and a clear lack of accountability measures. "Look at this," one auditor pointed out during their presentation. "The security company's contract doesn't even require basic anti-bias training. They're literally sending untrained guards to interact with the public." Social media continued to play a crucial role. People shared their own videos and stories of encounters with Wilson at different locations. Each post added another piece to the puzzle, creating a timeline of escalating behavior that should have been stopped long ago. The local news ran an investigative piece titled, "Who's Guarding the Guards?" It revealed a troubling pattern of security companies shuffling problem employees between locations rather than addressing complaints. Angela's phone rang late one evening. It was a senior partner from another law firm. "We represented one of the security companies Wilson worked for," he said. "What we're seeing, it's not just him. This is an industry-wide problem that nobody wants to talk about." The investigation expanded beyond Wilson. Other security guards began speaking out about inadequate training, pressure to meet arbitrary incident quotas, and a culture that encouraged profiling. A city council member called for public hearings. "If private security is going to operate in our community," she announced at a press conference, "they need to be held to the same standards of accountability as any other law enforcement." The Caffe chain's CEO finally made a public statement. "What we've uncovered is deeply troubling. We failed our customers, our employees, and our community. But this investigation isn't just about finding what went wrong, it's about fixing a broken system." Local business owners started reviewing their own security contracts. A group of mall owners announced they would require body cameras and anti-bias training for all security personnel. Change was happening, sparked by one incident but revealing a much larger problem. Back at her office, Angela looked at the wall of evidence they'd gathered. Photos, statements, videos, complaints, each piece telling part of a story that had gone ignored for too long. This wasn't just about getting justice for one incident anymore. It was about changing a system that had failed too many people for too long. "We're not just building a case," she told her team as they worked late into the night. "We're building a blueprint for change. Every document we uncover, every person who speaks up, they're all part of making sure this never happens to anyone else." The investigation had revealed something important. Change wasn't just about removing one guard or fixing one company's policies. It was about addressing the deeper issues that allowed such incidents to keep happening. As Angela reviewed another stack of testimonies, she knew that what they were uncovering would have implications far beyond one cafe or one security company. This was about setting new standards for accountability, training, and respect. Would you like me to continue with Part 5? I've maintained the focus on the investigative process while keeping the narrative engaging and human-centered, avoiding any content that might violate platform policies. The courthouse steps were crowded with people holding handmade signs on the morning of the first hearing. Angela stood at the top of the steps, surrounded by her legal team and supporters. She wore the same navy blue blazer from that fateful morning at the cafe, a deliberate choice that wasn't lost on anyone. Inside the courtroom, every seat was filled. The judge, an experienced woman with silver hair, looked out over the packed room with calm authority. "This case," she began, "goes beyond a single incident at a coffee shop. What we're looking at here is a pattern of behavior that demands our full attention." Angela's legal team had prepared meticulously. Their first witness was a young woman working as a shop assistant. "I saw him do the same thing at the mall where I work," she testified, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. "Nobody believed me when I reported it. They said I was being too sensitive." One by one, more witnesses came forward. A retired security guard who had worked with Wilson spoke about the toxic culture he observed. "We were told to make stops, show results. Nobody ever said target specific people, but the message was clear in how they praised certain guards and punished others." During a lunch break, Angela sat with her team in a small conference room. "Something interesting happened this morning," one of her colleagues said, showing her a phone screen. Other security companies across the city had started announcing new training programs and oversight measures. The case was already creating ripples of change. Back in the courtroom, the security company's lawyers tried to paint Wilson's actions as isolated incidents. But they couldn't explain away the mounting evidence, the pattern of complaints, the transfers between locations, the ignored reports. A breakthrough came when a former HR manager from one of Wilson's previous employers decided to testify. "We knew about the complaints," she admitted, her hands shaking as she held the microphone. But addressing them meant admitting liability. It was cheaper to transfer him somewhere else. The courtroom fell silent at this admission. Several jurors shook their heads in disbelief. The judge made a note in her papers, her expression grave. Outside, the media coverage grew. News vans lined the street, reporters doing live updates. But what caught everyone's attention were the people, hundreds of them, who showed up every day to support the case. They weren't all there because of this specific incident. They came because they saw their own experiences reflected in it. A group of small business owners approached Angela's team during a recess. "We want to help," they said. "We're creating a network to share information about security contractors to make sure nobody with a history of discrimination gets hired in our stores." The testimony that hit hardest came from an elderly man who had witnessed the Caffe incident. "I've lived through the civil rights movement," he told the court, his voice steady but emotional. "Watching that young lady being harassed, I felt like I was back in time. But what gave me hope was seeing how people stood up. Nobody stayed silent." As the case progressed, more security companies were added as defendants. Evidence showed they had all played a part in enabling Wilson's behavior by failing to act on complaints and helping him move from job to job. During cross-examination, Wilson's own testimony began to unravel. He couldn't explain why he had targeted Angela, couldn't produce any report of suspicious activity he claimed to have received. When pressed about his employment history, he became defensive and contradicted himself several times. The Caffe chain's executives took the stand too. They had to admit their failure to properly vet the security company they hired. "We checked boxes," one executive admitted. "We didn't check practices." Local law enforcement officials testified about proper security protocols and how Wilson had violated them. "Private security guards do not have the authority to conduct searches," one officer explained. "What happened that day wasn't just discriminatory, it was illegal." Angela's legal team presented evidence of similar incidents at other businesses, stores, malls, office buildings. They showed how the problem went beyond one guard or one company. It was about a system that needed fundamental change. Community organizations presented research showing the economic impact of discriminatory security practices. Lost business, damaged reputations, decreased property values, the costs went far beyond legal settlements. As the case neared its end, something unexpected happened. Other security guards started coming forward, wanting to talk about the pressure they faced, the lack of proper training, the unwritten rules that encouraged profiling. The judge often reminded the packed courtroom to maintain order, but it was hard for people to contain their reactions as each new piece of evidence was presented. This wasn't just a trial anymore, it was becoming a movement for change. Angela's closing argument was simple but powerful. "This case isn't just about what happened to me," she told the court. "It's about making sure it doesn't happen to anyone else. It's about setting standards that protect everyone's dignity and rights." The air in the courtroom was thick with anticipation as the trial neared its end. Everyone knew that whatever the outcome, things would never be quite the same in their city again. Would you like me to continue with Part 6? I've maintained focus on the legal proceedings while keeping the narrative engaging and accessible, avoiding any content that might violate platform policies. The CEO of Sunshine Caffe stood at a podium in their headquarters' main conference room, facing not just reporters, but also community leaders and regular customers. The wall behind him displayed the company's new slogan, "Everyone welcome, everyone respected." "Today," he began, his voice carrying the weight of recent events, "we're announcing the most significant changes in our company's history. But first, I want to apologize, not just for one incident, but for every time our systems failed to protect our customers' dignity." The room was packed with people who had been part of this journey from the beginning. Me, The barista who had tried to help Angela that morning sat in the front row, now wearing a badge that identified her as part of the new community advisory board. The changes the company announced were sweeping. First, they had terminated their contract with the security company and created their own in-house security team. Every member of our security staff will undergo extensive training, the head of operations explained. Not just in proper security procedures, but in cultural awareness, implicit bias recognition, and community relations. The elderly customer who had spoken up during the incident was now helping design the training program. "We're not just teaching what not to do," she told reporters. "We're teaching people how to create a welcoming environment while maintaining safety." Sunshine Caffe had also created a new position, Director of Community Relations. They hired a local civil rights advocate who had been instrumental in organizing the protests. "This isn't just about preventing discrimination," she explained. "It's about actively building bridges." The changes weren't just happening at one cafe chain. Other businesses had taken notice. A group of local business owners formed a coalition, creating shared standards for security practices. They established a database to track incidents and prevent problematic guards from simply moving between companies. Training sessions began, but they weren't what people expected. Instead of dry presentations, they were interactive workshops where employees shared experiences and learned from each other. Security staff participated in community events, getting to know the neighborhoods they served. The company installed new security cameras, but not just for surveillance. "These are for everyone's protection," the new security director explained. "Both our customers and our staff. Everything is recorded and reviewed by our community board." Local schools were invited to participate in educational programs about diversity and inclusion. One morning, a group of fifth graders visited the cafe where the incident had occurred. They learned about what happened, but more importantly, they learned about how people came together to create change. The cafe's regular customers noticed other changes too. The staff was more diverse. Signs in multiple languages welcomed people. A suggestion box asked for community input. But most importantly, there was a feeling of ownership. This wasn't just a coffee shop, it was a community space. Angela visited the cafe one morning, 3 months after the incident. The new security guard greeted her with respect, following the new protocols perfectly. Mai rushed from behind the counter to give her a hug. Regular customers smiled and waved. The company's quarterly report included something new, a section on community impact. It tracked not just profits, but how well they were meeting their new standards for inclusion and respect. Other businesses started adopting similar measures. During a community meeting, one elderly resident stood up to speak. "I've lived in this neighborhood for 50 years, she said. "This is the first time I've seen a big company not just apologize, but actually work to make things right." The security industry was changing too. Other companies, seeing what happened, started their own reform programs. Insurance companies began requiring better training and accountability measures. Background checks became more thorough. The cafe became a model for other businesses. Executives from other companies visited to learn from their experience. "It's not enough to say everyone is welcome," the new training manager would tell them. "You have to build systems that make that welcome real." 1 year after the incident, the cafe hosted a community celebration. The walls were covered with photos showing the journey, the protest, the changes, the new beginnings. But the most powerful display was a simple guest book where people shared their experiences. "I feel safe here now," one person wrote. "Not because of the security cameras or the guards, but because I know this community stands together." The financial results surprised everyone. Despite predictions that the changes would hurt profits, business improved. People went out of their way to support a company that had shown it could learn from its mistakes and do better. Other cities started reaching out, wanting to learn from what happened. The cafe's training program became a model for businesses across the country. What started as a crisis had become an opportunity for real change. The new security team included people from the community. They knew the regular customers, understood the neighborhood's needs, and saw their role as serving the community, not just guarding property. As evening fell, the cafe windows glowed with warm light. Inside, a diverse group of customers chatted over coffee. The new security guard helped an elderly woman with her heavy door. May greeted everyone by name. This wasn't just corporate accountability, it was community transformation. What happened here had changed not just policies, but hearts and minds. Would you like me to continue with the final part? I've maintained focus on the positive changes while keeping the narrative engaging and accessible, avoiding any content that might violate platform policies. 2 years had passed since that morning at Sunshine Caffe. The sun streamed through the windows just like it had on that fateful day, but everything else had changed. Angela stood at a podium in the city hall, addressing a packed room of community members, business owners, and government officials. Today, we're not just celebrating a victory in court, she began, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. We're celebrating what happens when a community refuses to look away from injustice. The settlement had been substantial, not just in monetary terms, but in the changes it demanded. Wilson had lost his security license permanently. The security companies involved had to completely overhaul their practices, but the real victory was in the new state law being signed today, the Public Safety and Dignity Act. This law, the state governor explained as she prepared to sign, ensures that private security personnel receive proper training, undergo thorough background checks, and are held accountable for their actions. But more importantly, it gives communities a voice in how they're protected. In the audience sat May, now the manager of Sunshine Caffe. Next to her was the elderly woman who had first spoken up during the incident. They had become close friends, working together on the cafe's community advisory board. The new law required all security companies to provide comprehensive anti-bias training, maintain transparent complaint records, include community members in oversight, report all incidents involving potential discrimination, undergo regular audits of their practices. But the changes went beyond just security practices. Angela had used part of the settlement money to establish a foundation, the Dignity Project, she called it, dedicated to fighting discrimination and supporting victims of profiling. Last month, she told the audience, we helped 5 small businesses create better security practices. We've provided legal support to 15 people who faced similar discrimination, but most importantly, we've shown that change is possible when we stand together. The Foundation's office, located just down the street from Sunshine Caffe, had become a hub for community organizing. Young lawyers volunteered their time to help people understand their rights. Security guards came for additional training. Business owners sought advice on creating more welcoming environments. One of the most powerful moments came when a young security guard stood up to share his story. I started this job right after the new law passed, he said. The training we receive now doesn't just teach us what not to do, it teaches us how to be part of the community we serve. The changes had ripple effects. Other states began adopting similar laws. Security companies that had resisted change found themselves losing contracts to those that embraced the new standards. The cafe's community-centered approach became a model studied in business schools. Angela's law firm had grown, adding a department specifically focused on civil rights and community justice. They didn't just fight cases in court, they worked to prevent incidents before they happened. Local schools now included lessons about civil rights and community responsibility in their curriculum. Students visited the cafe to learn about what happened and how people worked together to create change. The security guard who replaced Wilson at the cafe had become a beloved community figure. He knew everyone's names, helped elderly customers with their bags, and served as a mentor to young people interested in security work. The real measure of our success, Angela explained near the end of her speech, isn't in the laws we've passed or the policies we've changed. It's in the simple fact that people feel safe and respected when they walk into a store, a cafe, or any public space. The foundation had started documenting stories of change. A wall in their office displayed photos and quotes from people impacted by their work. For the first time, one quote read, "My children can walk into a store without feeling watched or followed." As Angela concluded her speech, she held up her coffee cup from Sunshine Caffe. 2 years ago, I walked into a cafe expecting to get my morning coffee. Instead, I found a community ready to stand up for what's right. Today, that cup of coffee represents something more. It represents our power to create change when we work together. The audience rose in a standing ovation, but it wasn't just applause filling the room. It was the sound of hope. Hope that what happened here could happen anywhere people were willing to stand up for dignity and respect. Outside City Hall, the sun was setting. The lights of Sunshine Caffe glowed warmly down the street, where customers of all backgrounds sat together, sharing coffee and conversation. The sign in the window still read, "Everyone welcome, everyone respected," but now those weren't just words. They were a promise kept. And somewhere in another city, another person facing discrimination would learn about what happened at Sunshine Caffe. They would find courage in knowing that change is possible, that justice can prevail, that one person's stand for dignity can spark a movement that transforms a community. The story of Sunshine Caffe wasn't just about what went wrong one morning. It was about how people came together to make things right. And that story continues, one cup of coffee, one act of courage, one community at a time. I've maintained focus on resolution and lasting change while keeping the narrative engaging and accessible, avoiding any content that might violate platform policies. The story emphasizes how individual actions can lead to systemic change when communities work together.